Hi, welcome. Thank you for joining us for the Risk Management and Business Continuity, How the Pandemic Highlighted the Overlap, and it's presented today by Brian Veach. Brian is currently an emergency preparedness specialist and alternate COOP coordinator for CNS Pantex. Brian is also the vice chair for the COOP subcommittee, and we appreciate you doing that, Brian. Prior to joining CNS, Brian spent 10 years in private industry at a gas centrifuge uranium enrichment facility with time in emergency preparedness and operations. Brian began his career after 10 years in the U.S. Navy as a nuclear operator. Again, thank you for your service, Brian. Brian holds a BA in Emergency Disaster Management, a graduate certificate in Organization Resilience, and a Master's of Public Administration. He is also a certified emergency manager and certified business continuity professional. Before we welcome Brian, would you please mute your microphone if you haven't already and stop your video if you have a video running? And remember, you can enter your questions in the chat tool, and our presenter, Brian, you can address those after the presentation. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Brian to the virtual stage. Brian, welcome.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our session. Today, we'll be talking about continuity of operations, risk management, and business continuity, and how the pandemic highlighted the overlap here at Pantex. A little bit about me to get us going. My name is Brian Veach. I'm the Emergency Preparedness Specialist here at CNS Pantex. I do serve as the alternate COOP coordinator currently. I put my contact information up there if you'd like to reach out. I am available really to talk about anything if it's emergency management, continuity of operations. You want to know a little bit more about benchmarking about our response to COVID or just in how we approach continuity of operations in general. Feel free at any time to reach out to me. You can call me. We are currently kind of working from home still a little bit and the office, so I put both my government cell and my office up there along with my email. Feel free to reach out whenever you have any questions. My history started right out of high school in the nuclear industry. I joined the Navy, spent 10 years, a little under, working in the Navy. I was a machinist, mate, and engineering laboratory technician. So Chief and I kind of share a little bit of a shared history in that way, that we made ourselves from the Navy, the nuclear Navy, over to the continuity of operations emergency management realm. So kind of an interesting path. Got out of the Navy and I went to work at Urenco USA, which is a facility that enriches uranium, and continued kind of my nuclear career. I started in shift operations, decided I wanted to make a change, moved over into emergency preparedness, and spent the last 5 or 6 years that I was there in emergency preparedness. And then in 2018, decided I would try to hit the last of the three, say, nuclear industries here in the United States. I started in the nuclear Navy, went into the private industry, and now I'm working for the DOE. And I started at Pantex back in May of 2018. Initially focused on drills and exercises, and within the last 2 years, I've switched over to continuity of operations. I do hold a bachelor's in emergency management. I just finished back in December my master's with a concentration in emergency management, and I also have earned a graduate certificate in organizational resilience. So why are we here today? I don't think anybody would argue that the pandemic wasn't tough for us all. Right? I don't know of anybody that truly said, hey, I saw this coming and knew exactly what was going to happen. For me, it was a little surreal. It was very slow initially. We're not sure. It was building up, and then things happened so very quickly. So we didn't really have time, like initial incident, like a typical operational emergency where things go boom and then we just respond. We had a little bit of time to think about it, and maybe we thought about it a little too much. A lot of organizations manage this very differently. Here at Pantex, initially emergency management was heavily involved. Here at Pantex, our continuity of operations personnel are embedded within emergency management, so we are involved because of that. Our occupational medical was involved. Some sites may have been lucky to have public health personnel, we have occupational medicine, and they were helping us out, but they were also working with our industrial hygiene and safety department and kind of handling it from that aspect of it. Because let's face it, I mean, it was kind of a safety significant thing. You know, you talk about environmental safety and health. Well, health is that part of it. Other sites, senior management, it may have been handled in that C-suite level, just dealing with people. Or if you have your site has risk management, a lot of sites have risk management folks that answer directly to that higher senior management, that C-suite. Additionally, there was an information technology or information systems piece. A lot of us initially, when we said, "Hey, we're going to do teleworking," just to kind of help, increase social distancing and stuff like that, maybe we weren't really set up for it. So there was a lot of different puzzle pieces, a lot of different moving parts to the pandemic, and they all didn't line up initially, and they didn't, quite fit together the way we would have hoped right off the bat. What I'd like to say is, regardless of who was in charge in your organization, who was leading the charge, the goal for all of us was the same. We were trying to minimize the impacts and the disruption on both our personnel and our operations. We all have essential missions we perform, whether you go right up to a departmental MEF and a PMEF and up into the national essential functions or not. Your site exists for a reason, and you have something that is essential to you guys to continue. So you wanted to minimize the disruption on both your personnel and your operations. So we were all working in that same direction, regardless of what we call ourselves. So business continuity or risk management. These are two words you'll hear. I would say I don't hear them as often in the DOE and NSA as I did when I was in private industry. But we do have risk management here at Pantex. We don't often talk about business continuity. So they're not the same thing. And we'll kind of talk about what's the difference. So a lot of organizations probably have risk management, whether you know it or not. I would go and venture a guess that most labs plant sites have a risk register, and whether they have a complete risk management organization or maybe some risks specialist embedded in finance and business operations, right? They are doing risk management. It's not a new concept. It's been around for decades. Organizations have been looking at risk and trying to manage it. So it exists whether you know it or not, whether you've worked with them or not. They probably are at your organization. The issue may be that they may evaluate stuff that from a business continuity of operations standpoint, not something we look at. So it could be risk associated with financial markets. It could be risks associated with international trade deals or things like that. Something that, like, you look at it from a continuity of operations, you're like, okay, that doesn't matter to us when we talk about large incidents, emergencies. This is not an emergency, but they may be some overlap. Let's say there's some labor disputes, and you're going to say, well, how does that affect continuity of operations? Well, when you have nobody to run your facility, I don't matter if it's because they can't get there because of a snowstorm or they're not coming into work because of a labor dispute, right? That's an issue for continuity of operations, but it is also a risk to the organization, and that's likely been evaluated by risk management. It could be both from a business side for the maintenance and operating contractors, and it could be, I said, from just the impact on essential operations. All of us, working for various parts of the NNSA and DOE. So business continuity is not COOP. If you've taken continuity courses outside of the DOE and NSA, whether it's through DRI or ISO, continuity of operations planning is usually considered a subset of the overall continuity planning. So most business continuity plans include a continuity of operations plan. So continuity operations is a part of the overarching business continuity plan. Additionally, business continuity may cover some of the same areas that risk management. That's what I just was speaking about, but not always. There may be some overlap. There may be some concerns that business continuity has that risk management does not, and vice versa. Although I would say if it's a risk enough for business continuity to be looking at it, it probably needs to be in the risk register, and your risk management folks should be at least evaluating it, though it may not necessarily go the other direction. And then we come to disaster recovery. So, what is disaster recovery? Well, this is honestly probably some of the first continuity, industry when we start talking about this. This is, again, it's not new. It's been around for a long time. It's typically when you talk about disaster recovery, you're looking at something like information technology or some other vital system. It's usually really, associated with technology, whether it's communications, the internet, computers. That's typically where you hear people talk about disaster recovery, and it's IT disaster recovery. When they talk about the disaster, when you get into disaster recovery, it doesn't really, again, matter what the initiator was. It could be a fire, and you say, okay, that's a true emergency. Now we've had a fire in the facility. We got to get our people out. We got to get all this, and we got to deal with that 100%. Disaster recovery is focused on that technology piece and getting your information systems back up and running. So whether a fire destroyed a server, or there was a water leak and it leaked down and destroyed the server, or the server burned itself up just from if getting too hot and an air conditioning failed, it doesn't matter, right? The loss of the server is the issue. And that's the disaster that is going to start your disaster recovery plan. So it can range, when you talk about disaster recovery, from things all the way from a fire, a flood, another emergency, all the way to um, this piece of equipment is outdated and failed. Or what we saw here at Pantex, like kind of right off the bat, was our IT systems were not set up for the demand we placed on them when we tried to start teleworking. Is that a disaster? Not necessarily, but it definitely required planning and coordination, because we had to say we have X amount of capacity available and we have Y amount of demand, and those didn't match. So we had to manage that difference until we were able to match, our supply and demand, and say, okay, now we no longer have an issue. And our IT folks did a great job, but they used a lot of that disaster recovery planning to manage that. Additionally, when you talk about disaster recovery, you may hear something else that folks that have been around for the continuity for a long period of time, usually we talk about recovery time objective that says, hey, we want to recover in this amount of time. We want this operation to be back and running within X many hours. A lot of times when you talk about disaster recovery, they're looking at a recovery point objective. They're very similar, but usually it's just a point in time. So they're saying we want to be able to recover our systems to, X, and it's a point in time that says this is when they were running, and it could go back and say we update our HR database every night, so we know our recovery point objective is the day before. Or it could be a recovery point objective can be a level of operations, and you'll say, okay, we want to be able to get back to where we have X many connections to our VPN. So the recovery point objective, recovery time objective, very similar. It's just kind of whether you're looking and say, I need everything back in 12 hours, or I want to get back to a specific point in my ability to continue operations. When we talk about continuity of operations, most of us are familiar with that, what it means for the DOE and for the NNSA, right? We're talking about it. It's MEFs and ESAs to ensure that the DOE continues to function and does its PMEFs, and those flow up to the NEFs, right? Why? Because at the top of that little hierarchy is that enduring constitutional government. That's what we're looking at when we talk about continuity of operations. So it's easy to say continuity is continuity. It doesn't matter what you call it. But I'd say it's very important to understand how continuity of operations and business continuity management differ in scope. BCM is a little wider when you talk about it than continuity of operations. As I mentioned earlier, the Disaster Recovery Institute, DRI, looks at continuity of operations plans as a subset of overarching business continuity management and business continuity plans. Now, is that true for the DOE? We are in a business, so do we really have business continuity management? Yes and no. We probably do most of it, but not all of it. So you see the new DOE Order 150.1b, the new Federal Mission Resilience Strategy. We're getting a lot closer. Business continuity, again, it's not new. Organizations have been doing it for a while. There may be new terms associated with it, but it's been around. It's not a new profession. It's not a new industry. It's 30 plus years old. It's just now getting more attention and more focus as disasters are becoming bigger. I mean, as we become more interconnected, a disaster for one organization is a disaster for another, and you got to be prepared for that. And technology is making some things easier, but when we saw with the pandemic, technology is not foolproof. And when issues arise, they arise for a large number of people. I said, so that's something that to understand is that really we're moving our kind of our continuity programs, if you will, a continuity of operations, but it's really just continuity as a whole, um, closer to what would be traditionally called business continuity management. At the end of the day, I'm not one of those that's a distinction without a difference. So resiliency is kind of it's the hot word right now. It's the buzzword everyone's talking about is resilient. We want to be a resilient nation, and that's true. You hear Chief, you hear Dr. McGuire talk about it, that EM and business continuity, continuity of operations, they all go hand in glove. And that's true because when we have an incident, we need to respond, we need to save lives, and then we need to get back to doing what we do for the nation. So we need to be resilient. We need to be able to do that as fast, efficiently as we can, while doing the right thing and keeping our people safe and keeping our operations going. So that's resiliency. That's why we're here. As I mentioned earlier, COVID-19 was interesting. I don't know how else to describe it from an emergency management type perspective, continuity of operations. Um, this was probably the first public health disaster for most of us. There's a lot of us that have been around, and maybe you went through 9/11. I've known people that were in emergency management in New York City and in upstate New York on 9/11. I said so they they've been through major emergencies. They've been through Hurricane Katrina's in emergency management. They know this is they've done some big emergencies, and dealt with that. But we haven't really had a major pandemic in 100 years. So most of us, this was probably our first exposure to what a public health disaster would look like in the United States. Um, as I mentioned, to me, it was sort of surreal initially how slow information came out, but that's true of almost any incident, right? It's you don't have all the information you want, when you want it, and it's very slow coming in, and then all of a sudden you realize, okay, we have all the information we need. Now we make a decision. You're like, wow, we're behind the ball. We need to take drastic actions, right now to start protecting people's lives. And I think that's sort of what we did. We looked at what was going on. We gathered information, and then we said, hey, we have got to start doing something to keep our people safe. That response, who needed to be involved in it? Well, that was interesting. That's the part we didn't necessarily have. We knew we needed IT involved because we wanted to do more teleworking. We wanted to send people home. Initially, it was just what we talked about, our vulnerable populations, and then it expanded. And we had rapidly changing IT needs. So again, as I've said, it doesn't matter if we had 1,000 connections and then something burned up and now we only have 500, or if we have 500 and now we need 1,000. Our IT infrastructure didn't match our needs, and that was a disaster for us. We had to manage that so that it didn't become a bigger disaster. Risk management had a part to play in this because they understood the impacts from this. They had actually looked at pandemic. They had that in our risk register before all this began, and they had gone through and looked at some of it. Some of this they could anticipate, some of it they couldn't. But they sort of knew what various things meant. When we started saying, hey, we're going to go to max telework, we're going to shut down for 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Everybody remembers that. Risk management had that piece. They could tell us, here's the impact on our operations. This is what we're going to see based off of all of the research and stuff we've done beforehand. So that was very, very helpful for us when we started working with them. Emergency management, that's for us. I said continuity of operations is in emergency management here at Pantex. We had the strategic plan. We had the big thing that says, here's how Pantex manages an incident. We had a pandemic plan. We were maybe one of the lucky ones. Some people may have had great ones. Some people may have had none. We had one. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. We used it and we said, hey, this is some of the things we need to start looking at. We were lucky. We have great working relationships with our local areas. We were able to kind of piggyback on the local public health and get some of their information and work with the state. It's great. I said, I hope everybody has that same type of relationship with their locals and the states because it's great. I don't think anybody should be doing this on their own. And if you didn't have that, reach out to me, reach out to anybody else, right? We can help each other out, even if for whatever reason you can't reach out to a state or a local. And then this was a big one for here at Pantex. We asked ourselves this the whole time, and we're kind of still asking ourselves this: was this a COOP incident? If you've been on the COOP coordinator calls for the last year, you'll hear Chief and Dr. McGuire say, absolutely. This was a COOP incident, right? NA 43, NA 40 in general was very heavily involved. Maybe it was at your site, maybe it wasn't. I said, we look at here at Pentex, our MEFs and ESAs were never impacted. If that's the case, did we ever have a COOP incident? I would say yes, we did, because we used our plans to keep us from having an impact on our MEFs or ESAs. So to me, that's a COOP incident. That's what COOP should be able to do. The best COOP plan would make sure that you never had any impact on your MEFs or ESAs, right? If everything went well, you have a disruptive event, you input that assess, distribute, sustain, and you notice no difference in your daily operations for however long it takes you to get back to normal and reconstitute. So to me, that's a COOP incident. There's some debate about that. If we never had any impacts to our MEFs and ESAs, we never changed anything that went out the door. Is it really? Maybe it was just a scheduling. We have delays here from time to time working on things. Things get delayed for various reasons. They got delayed due to COVID. Not everything is a delay is a COOP incident. So was this one? Well, it's interesting. We're still kind of talking about it. I can't tell you that we have the perfect answer. Each discipline had its own role to play at Pantex, and we used everybody. I'll tell you out here. I mean, I don't think there was a group out here that didn't have some little piece of information that we needed to make this a success. IT did a great job. I mean, we did very little teleworking. I'll tell you that before this whole thing hit. If you've been to Pantex, if you're familiar with us, right, we do things very different than a lot of the sites. Jen always gets after me because she'll send me something from EDMS or something like that, and our firewall here at Pantex will not allow me to do it. It will not allow me to click on it. We're very controlled, very locked down. So VPN and teleworking was not something that we had invested heavily in. Our IT did a wonderful job and was able to get a lot of people home very quickly, and then actually make it functional. So they didn't just send these people home and then be like, well, hopefully you can make it work. They sent them home and used their processes and procedures to ensure that it went well. Talked about risk management and the schedules. Continuity of operations had already gone through and looked at staffing levels that were needed for various operations based off of a number of things. We looked at it from a snowstorm. What do we bring in when we have a snowstorm? We looked at it. What do we plan to bring in if we had a labor dispute and we had a strike? We had these numbers, and we were able to share that with our senior management just for their planning purposes and say, what do we need for mission critical operations? What do we need for mission essential operations? And we could tell them exactly what all these different organizations had said they needed. And that was very helpful. Our management, they loved it. That really helped them have targets in mind when they started talking about reducing the site footprint. ESNH and medical, they were honestly kind of our lead. They owned, I'll say, the pandemic. It was a health event. We have doctors. Why would they not own a health event? And I said, so that was great. They had a lot of good information, and they could translate the medical information for us, and they could wade through the various things that you saw, especially in the early days when the WHO and the CDC were not necessarily always saying the same thing. It was useful to have these doctors that could come in and say, this is what it means. This is what my professional opinion is. That was wonderful. Emergency management, continuity of operations kind of helped get everybody at the same table. And this is huge. I love it. One ship, one crew. That's true, not only for this site where we had all these different groups coming together, but I know I was reaching out to Lannel. Janice was helping me a lot. I was talking with Jordan and stuff like that. We were getting information. We were sharing stuff back and forth um, from Sandia, from Lawrence Berkeley, Lawrence Livermore, WIP. Right. I mean, Y12 and Pantex, we are one site really, right? Or two sites, but one contractor. So we work closely together. We were all working together because we all wanted to do the right thing, not just for our people, but for the nation. And we needed to figure out what that was. And then we had great support coming from the HQ, office when they could. Those weekly recovery meetings were awesome, but all the information we had at the beginning was great too. Um, so COOP for us became the tide that binds. Our job was to bring everybody together. We didn't have all the answers, but we brought them together and said, "You guys have the answers. Let's work through this." And that's where that overlap begins. This is where all of those professions that we talked about, all of those various areas at the beginning, this is where they started to overlap and really shine and show how there wasn't one area that was responsible for this. So I wouldn't say this was cascading impacts. Um, to me, cascading is this, as things go, they get worse. And, as they get worse, that didn't happen. To me, it was more like a domino. The first domino fell and then the next one, but it was very sequential. We knew what was coming, and things just had to happen, and they had to happen in an order to go. And I think that's what happened with COVID. It was more of a domino than, say, just an absolute cascading effect. So we talked about it. Our IT systems needed to be expanded. They needed to be expanded rapidly. We were able to do that. Um, Huge growth, exponential growth in terms of what we needed. Initially, we had to have priorities for access. And as it went up, we were able to expand those groups, but we still had to prioritize. So one group may be given 10 connections, and they had to schedule their folks inside of there. And then eventually it went up. So that was very unique, very challenging for us. And I talked about reducing our staffing on site. That's where we are the ones that had the information. We got the information from all the other organizations on site. I don't know how many people our maintenance folks need, but I brought that information in, and then I coupled it with security, and I coupled it with everybody else. And I said, okay, this is how many people in total we need. And then we were able to work with our senior management and medical to say, this is what we're going to go with. Mentioned it before, right? Who remembers the 2 weeks to flatten the curve? A year and a half ago, we all said we're going to go home for 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And we really believe that up here in Amarillo. We're far away from everywhere else. It was very delayed in terms of when our first case got here and stuff like that. We kind of watched it happen to the rest of the nation before it even came close to us. I said, so that was a little helpful to us, but at the same time, maybe it delayed our response a little bit because it wasn't real for us for a little bit. We sent everyone home, and they said 2 weeks. 2 weeks came and went, and now we start looking and saying, what were those new impacts? Because we expected 2 weeks, and 2 weeks was not what happened. Our risk management already had that data. They said, hey, here's what happens when you are gone for this many weeks. Here's what happens when this program gets behind this many weeks. And we knew who to go talk to. Our program owners for the various programs knew who they needed to talk to at NA10, NA70, NA80, and go and say, hey, what do you really need from us? What do you guys need right now? Things are going on. You're our customers. You tell us what you need. And then we can tailor our operations. We can tailor our staffing to meet those specific needs. And we can adjust schedules as we need to. So this was great. And this is what I talked about. When does a delay move from risk management to COOP space? That's tough. That's where you're going to have to work with those customers and say, we're going to be back 3 months, and they say that's not acceptable. Well, maybe that's a COOP incident. And if you say we're going to be back 3 months, and they said that's fine, you can take 4. Maybe that's just risk management. So we again were kind of involved, helped bridge that gap. I know you talked to NA43, and they said they were gathering a lot of this information from these various other programs to see what the impacts were. So again, that kind of leads you to say that this was very much a COOP incident, but we had to see what our customer what they could deal with. That's the only way you can know what a COOP incident is what deliverable that you're not sending them, how much of an impact it is on the customer. What we did notice was our COOP plan. It references the IT COOP plan, and we had some heartburn with the fact that IT very much called theirs a COOP plan, because it meant Pantex almost had two COOP plans, and that was confusing to folks. So we had worked with them. Bobby and I had talked with them, but we were not as integrated as maybe we wanted to be, maybe as much as we should have been. We actually had some outdated references. They referenced some things in our plan that didn't exist. We referenced some things in their plans that didn't exist. So it's great that we referenced each other's plans. That was helpful. It wasn't good that we referenced parts of each other's plans that no longer existed. Um, and we recognize, and I think most of us would say, IT is probably your most vital ESA. Most of us would have a hard time doing anything, at least in the near term, without any sort of IT. I said to get these backup processes and manual processes going again would be real tough. And then additionally, I say COOP meet risk management. Um, they had worked together previously, but it was very informally. They had just kind of touched bases. When Coop was doing, say, like a hazards analysis, they were looking at their like a THIRA for Coop. They said, "What are our risks?" They kind of went to risk management, got some data, and then left, and then they went off in their own separate ways. Um, so they had touch bases. We did have people we could talk to, but we were not as integrated as we should have been. Since then, we've worked together. We've gone and found our COOP scenarios. We've put them in our risk register. We have very frequent contact with our folks in risk management, and they're in touch with us saying, "Hey, here's what we're looking at." We're in touch with them saying, "Here's what we're looking at," and we're ensuring that the senior management has all of this data. So IT risk management COOP together at last. That's our goal. We want to put us all together. We realize that we have to do that. We're no longer in silos. We're no longer saying IT is going to go and plan their portion of the COOP plan and handle it. They just recently ran a big drill. They reached out to us and said, "We want your input in it. We want to know what you guys need from us." That was great. That's huge. Then we were involved in the drill. They let us sit in and listen and ask questions. So that was wonderful. And again, like I say, because we recognize none of us had all the answers, and we needed each other. Um, Working together really does ensure that integrated response. And one of the earliest things I learned when I joined emergency management was that plans are useless, but planning is everything. And that's what I'm saying we're doing now is we had plans before, but now we're doing planning. We're bringing people together. We're sitting in the same room. We're talking, and that is what's making changes. That's what's driving us to be better. And we are making our site more resilient, which is at the end of the day, I said, is the goal. So how does this affect business continuity? We don't have a specific business continuity group here at Pantex. A lot of people probably do not. If you do, I would be interested to hear it because I think some of the, especially for the MNOs, they are a business in that and then sort of an aspect. I'd love to know if there was an MNO out there who had a business side of it that was separate from the work they were doing for the government. Some of the larger ones may have them in parent companies and things like that. Just personally, I would like to be interested to see if you have any interaction with those folks because they may have some great information. Um, so we don't maybe say we don't call it business continuity. It doesn't mean we're not getting it done. Emergency management, continuity of operations, IT disaster recovery, risk management. Those are all areas in business continuity. It's just continuity, right? So we're doing it. And at the end of the day, I said it doesn't matter what we call it. The functions are occurring. So um, that's important to know is that we business continuity and continuity of operations aren't the same thing, but we're doing what we need to be doing. We're working towards that, and the reality is like business continuity is growing in and of itself and is becoming just more about organizational resilience. And that's not just for government but for private industry. So we're working towards the same goal, both in government and private industry, towards resilience. So continuity of operations for the government, business continuity management for private industry, all growing towards resilience. Imagine that. We're starting to share a lot of common terminology, a lot of common processes. So if you look at what DRI says, incident response, emergency management, disaster recovery, COOP, risk planning, right? It's all part of business continuity management. Really, at this point, we just need to start saying that this is just continuity. And it doesn't matter if you're government, private industry, not for profit. At the end of the day, if you have a disruptive event, you want to be able to continue what you're doing. Nobody wants to go out of business. For the government, going out of business is simply not an option. So we have continuity. And that's how we need to approach this is we call it whatever you want, but our goal is continuity. So like I said, most of us are doing BCM in some way. I am interested if there's anybody who actually truly has a business continuity kind of aspect of it that's solely looking at the continuation of the M&O business. Like I said, the government isn't a business, depending on how you look at it, but our business is ensuring the government continues its function. That our job, our business is ensuring that enduring constitutional government. So to me, we very much are business continuity. It's when we talk about going back to business as usual, right? That is our business. So that's how we need to approach it. So that we need to look at it and say we have business continuity. Whether we go and say it's just simply continuity or it's business continuity, we do continuity. And we need to understand like what all that means, what all it entails, and that there's various aspects of it. We need to bring it all together under the same umbrella. So business continuity, continuity of operations, disaster recovery, risk management, they aren't all the same thing, but they all work together, again, to kind of make that same thing. So they're very closely related. Us as continuity practitioners, we should bridge any gaps that might exist. Go out, find these people at your organization and say, hey, let's work together so that we can make a more resilient site, we can make a more resilient department, and then we can make a more resilient nation. And that's what we're all here for. If you have any questions, you can ask them now. Feel free to reach out to me. I gave you my contact information on slide 2. I said, so if you come up with something later on and you say, hey, what do you guys do about this? Feel free to reach out to me at any time. And thank you.
Thank you, Brian, for your presentation. I'd like to start our question and answers with a question that came in from Steve Robb. He says, in your opinion, should mitigation play a greater role in BCM and COOP? It appears to him that mitigation practices are not mentioned very often.
That's a wonderful question, and my answer would be, in my opinion, yes. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We've heard Dr. McGuire and NA43 come on and say that with the new FMRS, that's what they're looking at. I said, I do believe we need to pay more attention to mitigation. And that's honestly probably nationwide. We don't do a good job of maybe planning mitigation, even for natural disasters. But in the continuity world, we can definitely plan for mitigation a little better than we currently do. And I think we're going to have to with some of the new FMRS stuff that's coming out from listening to the presentations that NA43's put on.
Good response. I think we may have time for at least one more question. And we had one come in earlier that was, what issues did you find in IT disaster recovery, incorporating continuity of operations there at Pantex?
As I kind of mentioned in the presentation, IT had their own plan. It was separate from the continuity of operations plan that we currently had. And the funny thing was they actually called theirs the continuity of operations plan. So that was a little challenging. The reality was that, they had talked and emergency management had worked with IT. So we knew of each other's plans, but they weren't meshed very well. So I think the biggest challenge, honestly, is IT will do whatever we ask them to do. We just need to tell them what exactly it is that we need, so that they can go forth and provide that for us. And that was challenging. We needed to know exactly, what systems are central for us. And, we don't have that answer as an emergency management. We needed to go out to our folks that own these mission essential functions and ask them. That was challenging, because it's really kind of COOP playing the middleman between IT and some of these other folks. I said, but what we found was that actually people are really interested in engaging and working with us. IT wanted to be involved. They want to do the right thing. They want to ensure their continuity of operations, the resiliency for the IT systems. And the mission essential owners definitely have a want to be able to continue to do their mission day to day. So they want to work with you. They want to give you that information. It's just a matter a lot of times of reaching out, getting them in the same room. Which, those of you who've been around emergency management long enough know that 90% of emergency management is relationships, and that extends into the COOP world.
Good response there, Brian. Thank you so much. Well, this concludes this session. As a reminder, this presentation is recorded, and so it can be played back if you want to review it, or if you missed part, feel free to do that. Remember, complete the survey, and that will confirm your attendance. We look forward to seeing you at our next session, Virtual EOC Practices and Future Trends, a state and local perspective, presented by Justin Cates and Kevin Kay. Or there's a symposium by Yuri Graves entitled Why IEM, and that starts at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.